Early Hawaiians called it Haleakala, House of the Sun. I'm Jim Welch with naturalist Rudy Mankey, and what a spectacular place to be at 10,000 feet above one of the world's great dormant volcanoes.
And when you think of Hawaii, you don't think of cold, but I'm chilly right now, and that is a powerful wind that's coming up behind us. But these are exciting islands, and really the basis for them, of course, is the fact that they're volcanoes, and we want to talk about how these volcanoes came to be, do a little bit of plate tectonics. And then we also want to take a look at the plants and animals that somehow found their way to these isolated islands and made adjustments when they arrived. And then sadly, we've got to talk a little bit today about the alien species, the plants and animals brought over recently that have escaped and really changed the face of these islands. But it is an exciting story. The basis of it all, though, is a story of volcanoes, and there's a nice one right over our shoulder.
7.5 miles across, Rudy, and several points to look at, to talk about in this crater.
Yeah, and really, you mentioned that we were about 10,000 feet above sea level. If you tell the truth, see, that volcano goes all the way down to the bottom of the ocean, so you're talking about a submarine volcano. Just the tip of the volcano is sticking out now. 20,000
feet below, in fact, yeah. Sure. So that makes it 30,000.
Yeah. And if we'd been here about 750 years ago, this would have been active. I mean, this would have been a very active volcano then, spewing out lava, flowing out, and ash fall and the rest, volcanic bombs and such. And then slowly it became inactive, basically because the Hawaiian Islands are in the Pacific Plate, which is moving northwest about 4 inches a year over a hot spot, it's called. And when the heat bumps into rock, it forces it up to form these volcanoes. And then as the movement continues, moves off of the hot spot, and the volcanoes really become dormant. And that's exactly what happened here. And then for about the last 300,000 years, this stuff's been eroding away, and you can see signs of that all over the place here. And then a few more recent cinder cones coming up.
This volcano could erupt again, but it's highly unlikely, and if it goes, say, another 100 years, at some point, it will be declared extinct.
Yeah, it is amazing, though, to be standing and looking at a site like this, realizing now that this was once filled with liquid rock from deep beneath the surface. And that, again, is one of the things that makes these islands so very special.
Special not only in the sense of geology that you're talking about and the plants, but in the colors. And people from all over the world come to see this spectacular light show, the colors that come into this crater. Reds and grays of all shades, ochres, colors that stir the imagination.
Wind's blowing so hard, it's almost makes your eyes water just looking into it, doesn't it?
Takes adaptation for people and plants.
Well, at an altitude like this now, it puts it in really what you could call an alpine zone. And in Hawaii, everything above about 6,000 feet falls into that category. But you can only see that now on the island of Maui and on the island of Hawaii. Great stresses here. And when you start looking around, you don't see many plants.
See a few. What's this one right here?
Dubaltia is the genus name for that. Naenae is the Hawaiian name for it. That's an endemic genus found only on the Hawaiian Islands and nowhere else in the world. 21 species. The nearest relatives are tarweeds in California, so maybe some of them got over and became modified through time into something else. But that's one of many plants now we're going to see today that are found only on the Hawaiian Islands. But that's not an alpine plant typically all around the world. It's unique to here.
And one other one over here, Rudy. What's that one?
Pukeave is the Hawaiian name for that. Relatives in Australia. And you see it's a little shrubby plant. Usually it gets a little taller than this, but again, in an alpine region like this with the wind and the elements, it's kept rather small.
8,000 acres in the park, but one of the stars of the attraction would be what's beyond this fence, and very rare in this park itself.
Yeah, well, another one of those endemic species, and that's the group of plants and animals, the endemics, that need the most protection because of all the non-native ones that have come in. Silversword is the one that you would expect to see here, and there they are, scattered out. Little basal rosettes of leaves, they're called. Strange little plant because it lives a fairly long time, flowers only once in its life, and after flowering it dies. But you can see the new growth, and there are silvery-like, hair-like structures on those leaves. You see that a lot in the composite family, and believe it or not, that is one of the composites, very closely related to the other endemic that we saw up at the top when we began. Naenae. You remember that one? Very, very closely related, and sometimes the two things actually hybridize.
Hawaiians call this one ahinahina, which means gray, and a perfect name. Well, but the plant when dead is gray as well.
Gray in life and gray in death. But that is one of the composites, and when it flowers, and you can look down the way and see some of the dead stalks, when it flowers, it comes up fairly tall with composite-like flowers, you know, clusters of flowers on the top, and then after flowering, it dies away.
Found only at the 7,000 to 10,000 foot levels, and here at Haleakala is the home of the Silversword.
And endangered because feral goats got in here years ago and ate them up. Humans have dug them up, carried them away just because they were interesting. That's what's so important, to realize man is a part of nature, not separate from it, and we're responsible for taking care of it. And they've done that fairly well here. Those are interesting plants, though, found nowhere else on the earth than Hawaiian Islands are as far away from continental masses as any group of islands, so most of the plants couldn't get here, or the animals couldn't get here. This one couldn't get here, but man introduced it, and it survives beautifully at a place like this.
Here, Rudy, here's a bird that was brought in 1865.
Ring-necked pheasant right over there.
Female.
There's another introduction. Now, it couldn't get here on its own, but once it got here, you see it can survive and do nicely. Yeah, it is the female. Long tail anyway on that animal. And just looking for a meal, I suppose. Just looking for a meal a little bit. And feeds on right in the open areas like this and doesn't seem to really mind our presence at all, huh? Oh, that's interesting. Head on down the trail.
Two-thirds of Hawaiian forests, original forests, are gone, and all that Hosmer brought in didn't grow, only about a fourth of what he brought in.
Well, not everything that's brought into places like this survives here, but of course man has had a major effect, and every time I see sandalwood, I think of the hand of man in the Hawaiian Islands. I mean, these used to dominate, and look, now they're just very few. Does have nice flowers, almost a brick red color before they open. And then the whitish look.
Important tree to the Hawaiian industries in mid-1800s.
Cabinet making and other things, yeah. Oh, yeah, heavily cut and now barely struggling to survive. And then on the other side, varnish leaf is one of the common names for that plant. It's pan-tropical. I mean, it's all over the tropics. Shiny leaves, you can see fruit on it. Male flowers on one plant, female flowers on another. And then, talking about flowers, look at the ohia lehua flowering down the way there. Unbelievable clusters of red flowers.
The red lehua on the ohia tree.
Oh, that is beautiful. And you can see, again, producing a tremendous amount of nectar. Apapani just came in, look at it, to the flowers.
Wow.
Red bird, little white under the base of the tail, black bill. Oh, that's neat. Nectar feeder, one of the honeycreepers.
That's one you hope to see. And
oh,
look,
yeah.
The Evie, even more hard to catch here. There's a glimpse of it.
On that branch, yeah.
Long, curved honeycreeper again.
Immature, that'll be bright red once it gets to be an adult. But look at that beak on that thing. And that's an endemic species, not found anywhere except the Hawaiian Islands. Neat bird. There's another endemic species right there, Jim. Silver Geranium is the common name for that, and you can see the silvery hairs all over those leaves, kind of like the Silversword that we saw earlier. Same kind of adjustment for high altitude life. But that's an endemic species found only on the Hawaiian Islands, and since we know the Hawaiian Islands are volcanic, those things weren't here at first. They must have come in one form and then slowly over time changed into something else.
Some adapted and changed so much that they became extinct. They lost their defenses, and all of a sudden man came in, and 75% of all of the nation's plants and birds that are now extinct were endemic Hawaiian species.
Yeah, and the hand of man really changed the face of these islands. There's no question about it. We're at about 6,800 feet now. One of the nice things about Maui is that, of course, you go down to sea level. You remember the other day when we were there at those freshwater ponds. Totally different area, and of course those ponds are protected, and some of the rare birds that we would look for on Maui live only there.
One of the easiest birds to spot for many visitors would be the Black-necked Stilt. We saw them everywhere.
Yeah, and that's a really good common name, isn't it? Because the long stilt-like legs and that black on the neck, and it was the Hawaiian subspecies, again protected on the islands here. Long legs, the two of them, I remember, in that shallow water, looking at each other, walking together, and not even leaving ripples in the surface of the water.
And the night heron's quite common here as well.
Well, we got as close a look as if we've ever gotten to the immature black-crowned night heron. Remember that orange iris in the eye, all the streaking on the body. And then the adult. You remember fishing and having some success and changing fish into black-crowned night heron. That was really nice. And then the other one, the Hawaiian Coot. I thought that was interesting too, because the black bird on the water with the white on the front, but it extends much farther up on the head as compared to the American coot. So that was a nice one to see, and again, expected. And a rare sight, though, the Koloa maoli, the Hawaiian ducks. Yeah, we got a short look at that, but now those birds are typical of these islands alone. And then the shovelers. I always liked that big beak on the shovelers, and they were off in the distance, male and female. What a wonderful visit to Haleakala National Park and the island of Hawaii down the way. Let's keep going.